Hey everybody, it's Trish Jones here and welcome to episode 34 of Speak to Trish. And today I'm actually going to read a question from you from someone who asked this question. And it is Thursday today, by the way, so it is Transformational Thursday. And I hope that what I'm going to talk about today transforms somebody's life, because this is a biggie and it's something that's very dear to my heart, which you'll understand when you hear the question that was asked. The person asked, how do you heal the scars that hurt or offend you so you can move forward? I have tried unsuccessfully for years to let them go, but there are so many triggers that bring all of those memories to surface, and it hurts just like it happened today. When I read that, I was like, wow. And yes, I have a lot to say on this. For those of you who do or don't know my story, I was actually abused as a young teen and actually mid-teens. And, there are times when I get angry over what has happened. Not so much now, but there are times when, I want to fight back. There are times when I want an apology. There are times when I just don't want to stay quiet anymore, when, I just want to kind of go and blurt it out because there's an element of me that just, so annoyed. Now, that's not happened for a while now, I would say. And I think one of the reasons is because I am able to talk about it, and, I can certainly talk to my husband about it, et cetera, et cetera. But, abuse comes in many forms, right? There is the sexual abuse, there is the emotional abuse, there is the physical abuse, as in the beatings. And, when you have the emotional part of anything, that is where the problems lie, because the battle then isn't necessarily on the scar that you might see on your hand, if you endured physical abuse. It's the battle that goes on in your mind. It's the images that you still have, and also the anger. For me, one of the things, believe it or not, that gets me really, really angry is remembering that I couldn't think. If I sat and looked out the window, I was always asked penny for them, right? Which was my thoughts. And it was almost like I couldn't think about anything without telling the person what I was thinking about. And, one of the things that gets me really angry now is I just think, Trish, you're not even a weak person. Why didn't you just tell them where to go? And so there's an element of you that asks yourself, why did you endure that? Why did you put up with it? Why didn't you move on? We can all ask the whys. And, I've seen people ask that question, right? And they're obviously people who have never been through it. Sometimes we ask, why is it that women stay with men who are abusing them, or the other way around, actually, because some men get abused by women, but why do they stay? And it's much more than just about a secure home and the money, et cetera, et cetera. We're talking about people's feelings here. We're talking about emotions. But anyway, before I get emotional about this, let me just talk to you over some of the things that happened to me, and that I hope I can impart to somebody else to actually help you get over the scars of yesteryears, right? For a start, it's a process. It is step by step. Nothing happens overnight. And I know for some people, it's probably 20 years that this has been going on for, and you think, but Trish, when am I going to get over this? And I would say that the very first part, the very first step that you have to take in being able to move on is that F word that nobody really likes to hear. And no, I'm not going to swear. It is that word called forgiveness. And let me explain to you what forgiveness looks like, right? Because for some people, this is the hard part, deciding that you're going to forgive, but you have to make a decision that you are going to forgive. And you not only have to forgive the person who abused you, you have to forgive yourself for whatever reason, for the anger, for not getting out, for whatever it might be. It might not be your fault. You might have been a very, very young child, but there's still sometimes an element of us, we feel unclean, right? Particularly when it's a sexual act. We feel unclean. We then feel unworthy. Is somebody going to want us, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things go through our minds. But forgiveness doesn't mean that you let that person off lightly. Forgiveness means that you choose not to hold them hostage in your heart any longer. And once you've made that decision to forgive, you can start the healing process. And let me tell you what forgiveness isn't, by the way, before I move on. Forgiveness isn't, I'm going to tell them that it's all okay, or I'm going to acknowledge myself that I've forgiven them and I've forgiven myself, and then I'm going to be buddies with them. I'm going to be pally with them. I'll make a phone call, I'll talk to them, and everything's going to be all right like it was yesterday. You know what? If you want my advice, and particularly if it was any kind of abuse, you need to stay away from that person. Right? In my view, you need to stay away from that person. And if anyone else tells you any different, tell them come see Trish, right? And it is because of what she says later on about the triggers that bring all of these things up. That's one of the reasons why you want to stay away, because you know what? If you've got a wound, right? Why on earth would you see that wound start healing and then grab a pen or anything and start gouging away to open that wound again? In the end, it's going to go septic, right? You're going to have a problem. And if you're not careful, you might even lose your arm. So you want to stay away from triggers as much as possible. Now, there can become a time when triggers are not even an issue. But for some people, that takes a while. And I'll explain to you some of the things that I dealt with just recently. But let me not digress, right? As I said, for a lot of people, the forgiveness element is a big step. But here's the deal. You're not forgiving them, as I said, so that they get away with it lightly. You're forgiving them so that you release them from your clutches. And so you don't feel like you're holding them hostage in your heart. You don't go back to that place all the time, playing that record over and over again in your mind and asking the why questions. And at some stage, we've got to learn to put down the why questions, right? And move on with our lives. The one thing I do want to tell you, the one thing I want to encourage you with, I know that I've said lots of one things today, right? But the thing I really want to encourage you with, that abuse, that divorce, that whatever it might have been that you have issues with, that you can't let go, your parents abandoning you, whatever it might be, your purpose and your destiny remained intact despite what has happened. God ain't finished with you yet. He still has a purpose and a destiny for you that looks as beautiful as the day that you were born. And I know that for a lot of people, they won't be able to accept this. Sometimes there is an element of us that feels that we need to beat ourselves up all the time because of what happened. And we look at ourselves and we're so different than other people. And that's one of the reasons I'm grateful to God that he's given me the grace to be able to share my story, because I felt that I was the only one. I would look at other people and say, oh, it's all right for you because you haven't been through, this, and this. And then suddenly when you realize that there are so many other people, but there are so many other people who have not been able to open their mouth, who have not been able to share their story, and they are still breaking up inside. They're still hurting inside because they have nobody to share their story with. And if you're anything like me, there are the times at night, and I'm talking about even after I was married, because it was 14 years into my marriage before this came to light, or rather before I was able to speak out, right? But there were times when I would go to bed in particular, and the memories of what happened would come back, and I would sit there and all the scenarios would go across in my head, and I would be like, suppose my husband finds out this is going to happen, and oh my goodness me, I could lose my child, I could lose my husband, I could lose my home, and all of this goes on, and it feels like it's never going to stop. But I tell you, when God puts a different image in your mind of how much he loves you, of how your destiny and your purpose remains intact. For me, that was what started changing the image. I had to get a grip. I had to get an understanding of how much God loves me. In fact, I remember my little girl was, she was still months old. She wasn't a year yet. And boy, I'm not going to cry. I did get emotional when I talk about this, but I remember sat down in the living room and my husband was working at the time. And I looked at my little girl, and honestly, she was just so beautiful as a baby. I'm actually going to put a photo in the show notes just to show off how gorgeous our little girl was. And I looked at her and I just felt this love that I can't explain. If you're a mother, you know what I'm talking about, right? And I just looked at her and I said, God, is this the way that you love me? Because I love my daughter so much that I wanted to cry. I felt emotional. And anyway, not long after, maybe 15 minutes or so after, I put her to bed. And I came into my office and picked up a magazine that we get regularly called Word for Today. And I opened it up to the day, for example, I don't know what it was, 21st of March or whatever. And it said how much God loves you. And he saw all the problems that you've been through, and he felt it for you. And he loves you oh so much. I've never been able to find that piece. I had it for a long time, and I've even gone online to see whether I could find it. But did I sob? Did I sob my heart out, right? Because it was like God had read my mind. It wasn't what I planned to come upstairs and do, to pick up the Word for Today, but I just felt compelled to pick it up. And when I read it, it was like God was writing me a love story to tell me how much he loves me. And despite what has happened in the past, he still loves me as much as he did the day that I was born. And nothing I could do could make him love me any less. And not only that, he then told me in this article, it was all about how he's going to use me for other people to bring life back into their life, and how basically it wasn't over, because as far as he was concerned, my purpose and my destiny is still intact. And as I said, I sobbed my heart out, right? This is going back, 12 years now that first happened. And God is so good. Anyway, I'm gonna move on. When I read this question that someone gave, it resonated with me so much, because I was being abused by two people, one person sexually and the other person emotionally. And believe it or not, the sexual abuse is almost easier to overcome than the emotional abuse, right? And I'd recently come into contact again with this particular person who emotionally abused me. And let me stop there and go back. On that Saturday that I read this note, just that very morning, I felt compelled to pick up the phone and speak to this person who had emotionally abused me. And I couldn't. I'd gone through the phase where, as I said, I wanted an apology, right? I wanted an acknowledgement that this was going on. I wanted an apology. And there were times, as I said, I was angry. But on this particular occasion, I didn't feel like I need an apology. And even now, I don't feel like I need an apology anymore. It's like I've got over that. I don't even really care whether they acknowledge that this was going on. I've got over that as well. And I mean it. God has healed me of that. I'm not saying that I don't think about what happened and get annoyed about it, but in terms of giving me an apology, you know what? God has already reassured me that my purposes and my destiny are intact. So quite frankly, I don't need your apology. But there are triggers sometimes, right? And it was just the thought of the person's voice and the way they behave, the way they speak. I'm telling you, I could not pick up that telephone. And I said, God, do you know what? I have forgiven them. I have moved on. I don't want an apology. But for right now, God, I can't do this. I can't pick up the telephone. And, this is very recent, right? This is very, very recent. I said, I can't pick up the telephone and speak to that person right now, because I know it's going to trigger something off. And my exact word, well, not exact words, but almost verbatim was, it's going to put me in a bad mood for the rest of the day. Right? That's what I said. And I felt this peace that it's okay, Trish. You don't have to do that now. In fact, you don't have to telephone if you don't ever want to. And so I felt at ease to be able to not make that telephone call. So my point earlier was about not putting ourselves in situations where it's going to create a trigger. Right? I know some people say, no, you've got to get in front of that person. And when you're in front of that person and you don't feel that any longer, then you know that you've forgiven. Hey, cut me and I bleed, right? I'm human. And sometimes it takes a while for us to completely, and I don't even know whether sometimes we completely overcome these things, but I'm overcome it. I'm over it, I should say. Insofar as I said, I'm not begging for an apology. I'm not begging for an acknowledgement of what happened. I am living my life and I'm loving my life and I'm getting on with my life. And I don't care whether the person gets online. At one point, I used to be so afraid. Oh my gosh, suppose they realize I'm telling my story. You know what? That's their problem, not mine. Right? I used to be so worried about all of these things. And so it might be the case that there might always be a trigger every time I feel that I'm going to see that person or whatever. But for right now, I'm not going to deliberately put myself in that situation. I'm not going to deliberately put myself before that person so I can put myself in a bad mood, so that I can go back to the videos that was once playing in my head over and over and over. I have moved on and I don't have any intentions of moving back to that place. So this is my advice to you. Take it one step at a time. Take one thing at a time. The first step is, though, that you must absolutely choose to forgive. And as I said, choosing to forgive doesn't mean that you're being pally. It's the first step to not allowing them to rent space in your mind any longer. And then focus on those things that you love to do. How can you help other people? Can you help other people with your story? Because I'm telling you, the only reason that I know that I'm able to touch lives the way that I have been able to touch lives is because I'm real. It's because I'm honest. It's because God has given me the heart and the grace to put my story out there, to put myself out there. And I know it's vulnerable sometimes, and even when I first started telling my story, I would get people saying to me, oh, you're so brave. What they meant was, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And then I had one person say, oh boy, you didn't hide anything, did you? He was a pastor. And I thought, yeah, you're the very people who were telling everybody, when these kind of things happen in your church, shut your mouth and don't say anything. Just move on. And I just thought, I wanted to say to him, not my pastor, by the way, I want to make that very, very clear, not my pastor, but I wanted to say to this person I'd never met before, yes, it hasn't happened to you, so therefore you don't have to worry about it. You deal with your thing and I'll deal with mine. But again, I've kind of had to, not get so annoyed with people, because people are just not going to understand you, right? They are not going to understand. People are going to ask the why questions. People are going to say, well, why did you stay? Why did you put yourself in that situation? The why? Don't worry about the people asking the why questions, because you know what? Sometimes you only have to pull the cupboard door sometimes of other people's lives, and man, the skeletons that would come out, even you would leg it. So another one thing, stop worrying about what other people have to say. Start dealing with you. Start helping other people with what you have gone through, and help somebody else go through what they have gone through. And as I said, remember to forgive. Remember, forgiveness isn't about being pally. It is about not allowing yourself to be consumed any longer by what has happened. And your next step might be different than my next step, right? I can't tell you all of the steps that are going to happen, but I do know this: even neuroscience will teach us that in terms of the way the heart and the mind works, and how forgiveness is just able to heal wounds that, sometimes we didn't even know exist. They might come to the surface. And because we decide to let go, the body knows how to react correspondingly. and then it enables you to move on. So what I'm saying is your next step might be very, very different than my next step. But all the while, the body knows how to react. The heart knows how to react. And it is healing from the inside out. That's what you want. You don't want all of this religious healing, right? Go and stand in front of them. Go and talk to them. Go and be nice to them, despite what has happened to you. No, no, not in the name of religion, right? You want healing from the inside out, because it's the only time it's going to be permanent. I'm going to make myself available here. Go to speaktotrish.com. And if you want to speak to Trish about this, about anything that has happened in the past, there is a voicemail recorder that you can actually use. Leave your message there. I will get in touch with you. I will make it very, very private. But I hope that this has touched somebody's life today. I hope, in fact, the person who asked this question, I hope the person who asked this question, I should say, find this video and listen to it, and listen to it a couple of times, and give yourself permission to heal and to forgive yourself. So that's it for today, folks. I really appreciate you listening. Send this video to other people, right? I know that everybody knows somebody who has been abused. Most people, anyway. Most people know someone who has been abused. Somebody who can't move on. It might have been a bad marriage. It might have been a bad childhood. It may have been abandonment, right? It doesn't have to be, even that's a form of abuse, actually, when you abandon somebody. Send this video on to them. I'm relying on you to help me to get the message out to people, to help people to heal, to help people to move on, to help people become all that God intended them to be, without inhibitions, without thinking that somebody else is thinking bad of them, without thinking about their past, just being able to move on and live a fantastic life that God has ordained for you and for them. So I don't want you to be my evangelist as such, right? But I want you to get that message out there. I'd love for you, I should say, to help me get that message out there. So that's it for now. If this is the first time you've come to my channel and you're watching this on YouTube, then please remember to subscribe. And also, if you're listening to this via iTunes, then please remember to subscribe there as well. I love you all. Thank you so much for listening. God bless, and see you on the next episode of Speak to Trish. Ciao for now.